The moment you go silent, something cracks, not on the surface but underneath. The innocence she performed so convincingly suddenly has no audience. No reactions to hide behind, no explanations to twist, no emotions to feed on. And that's when the mask starts slipping. Silence doesn't accuse, it doesn't argue, it doesn't defend, it simply removes your participation. And without your participation, her narrative can't survive. What she called confusion turns into control. What she called misunderstanding turns into manipulation. What she called innocence starts to look rehearsed. Silence doesn't punish her, it exposes her. And once exposed, nothing between you ever works the same again. Silence is the most accurate psychological test because it removes distortion. When you speak, explain, react, or defend yourself, you introduce noise into the system. Emotion becomes fuel, words become tools, and the dynamic turns into something she can manage. Silence removes all of that. It strips the interaction down to behavior alone. Most relational games only work because men keep participating. You reply to clarify. You argue to correct misunderstandings. You reassure to calm tension. You chase to restore closeness. Each of these actions keeps the emotional loop alive, and as long as the loop is alive, truth stays buried. Silence breaks the loop. When you stop responding emotionally, you're no longer giving her anything to work with, no validation to absorb, no reactions to provoke, no explanations to reframe. What's left is raw behavior, and behavior never lies. This is why silence feels so threatening. Not because it's aggressive, but because it's uncontrollable. Words can be twisted, emotions can be redirected. Silence cannot. It sits there, neutral and immovable, forcing the other person to confront themselves instead of you. Most men think silence is passive. It's not. It's observational. It creates a vacuum where intentions surface naturally. When there's no emotional feedback, she can't maintain a carefully curated image. The performance collapses because performances require an audience. Think about it this way. As long as you're reacting, she's responding. As long as she's responding, she's in control. Pumpt's reverses that. Now she's reacting to your absence, your neutrality, your refusal to engage. And reaction reveals far more than response ever does. This is why silence exposes patterns so quickly. Sudden kindness, sudden defensiveness, sudden confusion, sudden accusations. These aren't random, they're stress responses. Her system is trying to regain balance and failing. Silence doesn't demand truth. It creates the conditions where truth can't hide. And once you see someone clearly without the fog of emotion, the dynamic is already changed. Whether you speak again or not, fake innocence isn't a lie in the obvious sense, it's a performance. A carefully maintained emotional posture built on confusion, vulnerability, and selective memory. I didn't mean it like that. You misunderstood me. I'm just trying to be honest. These phrases aren't explanations. They're shields. And like any performance, innocence requires an audience. As long as you're reacting, defending yourself, explaining your intentions, or arguing facts, she has something to play against. Your emotion becomes the counterweight that allows her to remain pure. The more you push, the more innocent she appears. Victimhood is reinforced by resistance. This is why confrontation often backfires. When you accuse, she doesn't examine her behavior. She examines your tone. When you question her consistency, she questions your motives. The spotlight moves off her actions and onto your reactions. And innocence survives. Silence removes the stage. Without your emotional participation, the performance has nowhere to land. No one to convince, no one to confuse, no one to redirect. The phrases stop working because there's no response to anchor them. Confusion becomes obvious when there's no one left to confuse. This is where cracks start forming. Her stories don't line up anymore. Her justifications feel rehearsed. The timing of her emotions becomes suspicious. Not because you called them out, but because you didn't. When you stop engaging, she's forced to carry the weight of her own narrative alone, and most people can't. The human mind is built to co-regulate. When that regulation disappears, inconsistencies surface. This is why innocence collapses fastest in silence. Not because she's evil or calculating, but because maintaining a false self is exhausting without reinforcement. The mask slips not from pressure, but from lack of support. And here's the most uncomfortable truth. If her innocence was real, silence wouldn't threaten it. Truth doesn't need an audience. Performance does. Silence doesn't accuse her of anything. It simply stops helping her pretend. Control in modern dynamics rarely looks aggressive. It's subtle, emotional, psychological. It's built through reaction loops. She says something slightly off. You respond, she shifts the narrative. You clarify, she reframes. You defend, and without realizing it, you're no longer interacting, you're orbiting. Fake innocence thrives inside this loop. As long as you react, she controls the pace. She decides when confusion enters, When emotion escalates, when resolution is postponed, your explanations become fuel, your concern becomes leverage, your need to be understood becomes the handle she pulls whenever stability slips. Silence breaks this mechanism instantly. When you stop responding, the loop collapses. There's no emotional pressure to redirect, no validation to harvest, no reassurance to extract. Control evaporates not because you challenged it, but because you exited the system entirely. This is when her behavior changes. She may soften suddenly, become overly sweet, ask if something's wrong, act concerned. This isn't care, it's recalibration. She's probing to see whether the control channel is still open, whether you'll resume the role that allowed her to stay comfortable without accountability. If that doesn't work, irritation follows. Confusion turns into frustration. Innocence turns sharp. Subtle blame creeps in. Why are you acting like this? You're being distant. I don't know what I did. These aren't questions. They're attempts to pull you back into reaction. Because silence doesn't just remove control, it exposes dependency. When someone relies on your emotional engagement to maintain their position, your absence becomes destabilizing. They're forced to confront something they were avoiding, that their influence depended on your participation, not their integrity. This is why silence feels threatening. Not because you're punishing her, not because you're manipulating, but because you're no longer predictable, and unpredictability removes leverage. Once control is gone, only two outcomes remain. Either she adjusts, dropping the performance and meeting you honestly, or the mask slips entirely. Silence doesn't force a result, it reveals one. Fake innocence cannot survive a vacuum. It requires constant interaction to exist. Tone adjustments, emotional cues, micro-reactions to measure how far the narrative can stretch. As long as you're present, questioning, clarifying, reassuring, she can maintain the illusion of confusion. I didn't mean it like that. You're overthinking. Why are you so sensitive? Silence removes the oxygen. When you withdraw your reactions, something uncomfortable happens. There's no feedback loop to anchor the act, no emotional mirror to reflect innocence back at her, and without that reflection, the performance destabilizes. This is where cracks appear. She may begin contradicting herself, stories shift, timelines blur, what was once framed as misunderstanding now looks like intent. Not because you exposed her, but because without your engagement, she has to carry the narrative alone. And that's heavy. Fake innocence works best when you're co-authoring it, when you fill in gaps, when you give benefit of the doubt, when you soften edges for her. The moment you stop doing that, the structure collapses under its own weight. This is also where urgency shows up. Suddenly she needs to talk, needs closure, needs clarity, needs you back in the emotional position you vacated. She may accuse you of stonewalling or immaturity, not because silence is wrong, but because it removes her ability to steer perception. Notice the shift carefully. Innocence sounds calm. Exposure sounds reactive. When silence persists, innocence becomes defensive. Explanations turn excessive. Justifications stack up unprompted. She starts answering questions you never asked. This isn't transparency, it's panic management. Because silence doesn't accuse, it doesn't challenge, it doesn't demand truth, it waits. And waiting is terrifying for someone relying on control through emotional fog. Here's the key truth most men miss. You don't break fake innocence by confronting it. You break it by refusing to participate in it. No arguments, no explanations, no emotional labor, just absence. And absence forces reality to surface, clean, unfiltered, undeniable. Once the mask slips, you don't need to react. You don't need to correct. You don't need to explain why you went silent. The information you needed has already revealed itself. Silence didn't destroy the dynamic. It showed you what was holding it together. When you go silent, you don't disappear from her mind. You become uncontrollable inside it. As long as you're responding, arguing, explaining, defending, she knows where you stand. Even anger is a form of engagement. Even disappointment gives her information. Information is leverage. Silence removes leverage. And when leverage disappears, control follows. This is the moment her behavior shifts. Not because she suddenly misses you, but because she no longer controls the emotional direction of the interaction. She can't predict you, can't frame you, can't manage outcomes. Uncertainty is unbearable for someone used to emotional dominance. Her mind starts running scenarios. Is he done? Is he talking to someone else? Did I push too far? Did I miscalculate? Notice what's happening here. For the first time, she is regulating emotion. For the first time, she is chasing clarity. This is why silence is often labeled cruel or manipulative. Not because it is, but because it flips the power dynamic without force. There's no confrontation to push back against, no behavior to criticize, just a void where certainty used to live, and voids pull attention. You may see sudden softness, a return to warmth, apologies that feel slightly off, concern disguised as care. These aren't always signs of genuine accountability. They're often attempts to re-establish influence. Control doesn't always look aggressive, sometimes it looks sweet. But here's the critical distinction. Genuine remorse seeks understanding. Loss of control seeks reaction. Silence reveals which one you're dealing with. If her outreach escalates emotionally, accusations, guilt framing, urgency, that's not love, that's panic. Panic caused by losing the ability to steer the narrative. And this is where most men fail. They break silence too early, they explain, reassure, clarify, they hand control right back. But the power of silence isn't in punishment, it's in observation. When you stay silent long enough, patterns emerge. Intent becomes visible, motivation separates from performance. You don't need answers, you need behavior under uncertainty, and silence is the only condition that produces it. Once control is lost, the dynamic is never the same. She may return, she may retreat, she may escalate, but one thing is guaranteed. She now knows you are not dependent on engagement to exist, and that knowledge changes everything. Silence doesn't just change the dynamic, it rewrites how she categorizes you internally. Before you were familiar, predictable, emotionally reachable on demand. She knew that if she pulled, you'd lean in. If she withdrew, you'd chase. That certainty made you safe, but it also made you expendable. Silence destroys that classification. The moment you stop reacting, her brain is forced to reevaluate you. Not emotionally, neurologically. Humans assign value based on scarcity and unpredictability. When something is always available, the mind stops tracking it. When access is suddenly removed, attention spikes. You didn't become more attractive by improving. You became more relevant by becoming unavailable. Her subconscious now asks different questions. Why isn't he reacting? What does he know that I don't? What changed? These questions matter more than answers, because attraction isn't built on reassurance. It's built on perceived depth and autonomy. Silence signals both. It communicates that your emotional state is self-contained, that your stability doesn't depend on her responses, that you are not orbiting her mood. This is where polarity returns. She stops seeing you as someone to manage and starts seeing you as someone to figure out. And the human mind hates unsolved puzzles, especially ones it once thought it understood. Notice the shift in her behavior after prolonged silence. She becomes more attentive, more careful with words, more emotionally expressive, or oddly cautious. That's recalibration. She's adjusting to a version of you that no longer plays the old role. And here's the part most men misunderstand. She doesn't return because you stopped caring. She returns because you stopped needing. Need creates pressure. Pressure creates resistance. Silence removes both. When you go silent, you're no longer asking for validation. You're no longer seeking resolution. You're no longer explaining yourself into relevance. You've stepped outside the frame. And once you're outside the frame, she has to step toward you to re-establish connection. Not because you pulled her in, but because she can no longer reach you from where she stands. Silence doesn't make you powerful. It reveals the power you already had, but gave away. Once that shift happens, the relationship can't return to what it was, because she now knows your presence is a choice, not a guarantee. Arguments bury truth, silence exhumes it. When you argue, you give her something to react to. She can deflect, reframe, escalate, or emotionally exhaust you until clarity disappears. Conflict creates noise, and noise protects deception. Silence removes noise. With no accusations to defend against, she can't hide behind emotional reactions. With no questions to answer, she can't redirect the conversation. With no pressure, there's nothing to push back on. So the truth leaks out on its own. It shows up in inconsistencies, in sudden emotional swings, in messages that overshare, in guilt that wasn't earned, in anger that doesn't match the situation. This is why silence feels threatening to someone who relies on ambiguity. They lose the ability to manage perception, and perception management is the foundation of fake innocence. You'll notice something important here. When someone is truly innocent, silence doesn't scare them. They remain calm, they wait, they trust clarity will come, but when innocence is performative, silence feels like exposure. It feels like standing alone on a stage with the lights on and no script left. That's when defensiveness appears. That's when blame resurfaces. That's when urgency escalates. And none of it's triggered by you saying anything. That's the point. Silence removes your fingerprints from the outcome. Whatever happens next is entirely driven by her internal state. You're no longer influencing the result, you're observing it. This is the cleanest data you'll ever get. Not promises, not apologies, not explanations. Behavior under uncertainty. Most men never see this version of a woman. because they're too busy engaging, fixing, clarifying, or reacting. They stay inside the storm and then wonder why they can't see the horizon. Silence puts you above the weather. You're no longer fighting for truth, you're letting truth present itself. And once it does, you don't need to confront it. You already know. Silence doesn't win arguments. It ends the need for them. And once truth surfaces without resistance, the choice becomes simple. Stay or walk. But either way, you're no longer guessing. You're deciding. She doesn't return because you waited long enough. She returns because you stopped negotiating your worth. Detachment is misunderstood. It's not coldness. It's not punishment. It's the internal shift where you stop orienting your emotional state around her reactions. And women feel this instantly. The moment you detach, your energy changes. You're no longer leaning forward emotionally. You're no longer seeking reassurance. You're no longer invested in controlling outcomes. That absence creates a vacuum, and vacuums pull. Her return isn't driven by logic. It's driven by loss of access. Before, she had guaranteed emotional availability. Your attention was predictable. Your presence was stable regardless of her behavior. That made you safe, but also optional. Detachment removes optionality. Now, she senses something has closed. Not angrily, not dramatically, quietly. And quiet closures are the most unsettling because they don't announce themselves. This is when she re-engages, sometimes subtly, sometimes emotionally, sometimes through curiosity disguised as concern. But understand this clearly. Her return is not proof of love, it's proof of recalibration. She's testing whether the door is truly closed or if you're just waiting for her to knock. And this is where men make their biggest mistake. They confuse her return with resolution. They rush to explain, they over-communicate. They reopen emotional access fully without observing whether her behavior has actually changed. Detachment is only powerful if it's maintained, not rigidly, not resentfully, but consciously. Because once she returns, the real test begins. Does she show accountability or just relief? Does she respect your boundary or simply re-enter the same dynamic? Does she meet you differently or does she expect the old access to resume? Detachment gives you leverage, but more importantly, it gives you clarity. You're no longer reacting to desire. You're evaluating behavior. If she returns with awareness, humility, and consistency, connection may be possible. If she returns with entitlement, urgency, or emotional bargaining, nothing has changed. And you'll see it immediately, because detachment sharpens perception. She doesn't return because you played a strategy. She returns because your absence forced her to face something uncomfortable. Whether that discomfort leads to growth or repetition is what determines everything that follows. Detachment doesn't guarantee she stays. It guarantees you don't settle.